Hey guys, so if you're someone who works on Shopify stores, but you've never touched a line of code in your life, then this video is for you. I'm going to explain how HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Shopify Liquid, and JSON work to create your Shopify store. I'm going to show you how to read them, and this video will give you a really good foundation for understanding what's going on inside your theme. I think that it's the right time for you to learn a little bit of code because it'll give you so much more control over Shopify right now, thanks to the latest updates that we've had, namely the custom CSS field and the custom liquid section and block. Those make it really easy for you to make these small modifications to your store and really tweak it to exactly what you want. You know, being able to go beyond the theme settings and really control your store with just a basic knowledge of code. So I've actually written an ebook as well. It's a little guide on coding for non-professional coders, if that makes sense. And this entire video basically covers chapter 1 of my ebook. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely check it out. You'll find the link in the description and in the comments. So I hope you're ready. Let's begin. Before we begin, I just want to show you a couple of tools that I'll be using throughout the video. The first is CodePen, which is what we're looking at now. This is basically a code playground. It just gives you a really easy and fast way to write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. And you can immediately see the result in this panel here. I'll just write some CSS, and as you can see, the results are immediate. So CodePen is a really good way to quickly demonstrate something or to build something that you're then going to copy and paste into Shopify, which is something I do if I'm using the custom liquid block or the custom liquid section in Shopify here. As you can see, this isn't very pleasant to work with. There's no code highlighting, there's no auto completion or anything like that. Whereas here, you know, I can really see what's going on and I can write quickly because of auto completion, and then I paste it all into here. The second thing I want to show you is the Chrome Inspector, also known as Chrome DevTools. And to access it, you simply click on any element on the page. So I'm just going to click here, right click that is, and click Inspect. And this will open up the inspector. And here we can see the page HTML, and we can use this arrow to hover over different parts of the page and see the code for those parts. And then we can also see the CSS in this bottom panel here, and we can even disable and enable some of those CSS styles. All right, now before we go into a closer look at each of the languages, I want to explain to you how the big 3 languages of web development work together. So that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Each of these languages has their own purpose, and you use them to achieve different things. It's not like a choice of you can use one or the other. Each of them does their own thing. Okay, and some people give you the analogy of like HTML is like a skeleton or something and CSS is the skin. I don't really like this analogy at all. I don't think it makes as much sense as the house analogy. These 3 technologies, let's say you're building a house. Writing HTML is like saying there is a living room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a balcony, you know, things like that. It doesn't actually describe the color of the walls. And for that we have CSS. So CSS actually describes what the HTML looks like. So another analogy that I like personally is the English grammar analogy. So we can say that HTML is the noun. It answers the question, what is it, right? What is actually on the page? And CSS is like an adjective because it describes the noun, right? It only describes, it doesn't actually put anything on the page. All it can do is say that this button is green, that this has a pink background, you know, that this is to the left and this is to the right, and that this is this particular size and this is a bit smaller. That's all CSS does, but it doesn't actually put anything on the page. Everything you see on the page is done with HTML, right? So this is the noun and this is the adjective. That's something that makes sense to me. I don't know if, let me know in the comments if that makes sense to you. But if you prefer thinking of it as a house, then the CSS would be like the color of the walls. You know, what are the style of the windows? Are they fancy and decorated, or are they really simple, basic square windows or something like that? All right, and now getting to JavaScript. JavaScript makes pages dynamic, right? And so it creates interactivity. Going back to the English grammar, JavaScript would be the verb. It's when you want to do something. You want the page to do something, right? Noun, adjective, verb. And again, verbs act on nouns. They say that this does this, right? And so here in my example, it handles interactivity. Whenever you click add to cart, you know, this counter goes up. There's no actual cart. This example is too simple, but you get the idea, right? In the house analogy, JavaScript would be like, you can turn on a tap and water will flow, right? You can turn the lights on and off. You can toggle the lights, right? And so on a web page, whenever you have some sort of interactivity, whenever something changes on a page without a refresh, when you have, say, a slider that changes images, whenever you have something that loads as you scroll down, that's all JavaScript. So sliders, carousels, we have this image changing when we change the variant, and this is all controlled with JavaScript. Whenever there are any interactions on a page without refreshing, that would all be controlled by JavaScript. And that's all. So as you can see, these three languages have distinctly different purposes. HTML is simply the structure. It's what is on the page. It's kind of like the content, although you could say the content is, you know, inside the HTML. But HTML is the structure. CSS is the presentation. It's the way that things look. And JavaScript is what they do. So JavaScript is the behavior. Now let's take a deeper look at each one of these and how they're actually written so that you can read and eventually write each one of these. So HTML is the structure of a page. It's probably the most important thing out of all the other web development languages, because without HTML, nothing else would happen. HTML used to be like the only thing you needed to actually have a website. And it used to be in these HTML files, which you can create using just Notepad or TextEdit on Mac. You know, any text editor, whenever you save a file as .html, suddenly you can double click it and it'll open in Google Chrome. That is a website. A HTML file is a website. It's a very ugly and raw website, but it is a website. Whereas the same is not true for CSS or for JavaScript. You can't just open them up in Google Chrome without anything else and something will show up. Nothing will be there. HTML is written using tags. So we have an angle bracket, then we have the name of the element that we want. For example, this would be a heading 1, the most important heading on a page. Then we can, inside this, put the content. And then we have a closing tag, which uses a slash before the name of the element, like that. So that's the opening tag, and this is the closing tag. And altogether, this forms a HTML element. And there are many different types of HTML elements. So a H2 would be a subheading. A paragraph element is a P, and we can write whatever text in here. This is like the paragraph element is what you use for just normal text on a page. It doesn't necessarily need to be a long paragraph. It's just like your standard text. We also can create a list like this, and we can have list items, right? Now, I'm just using an autocomplete here, so I don't have to write out each one. That's how these are appearing. This is just a feature of CodePen, so I can write li and then I tab and it automatically does that for me. But anyway, so this is a list, and as you can see, it creates these dot points on the page. We can also create a link element, and a link uses the letter A. So in here we will put, this is a, actually we'll put like click here to go to Google, okay? It has this href equals and then quotation marks. What does this mean? Well, this is an attribute. HTML elements can have attributes inside of the opening tag like this, right? And each one of them could have different attributes. The href attribute is something that you can only put on links, and this is where you want the link to go. So we want to go to google.com, like so. And so this would take us to google.com. And this is a fully functioning link. Now, remember that word, attribute. Here's an image element. And we have two attributes here. We have the source attribute, which is where we put the URL of the image. And we have the alt attribute, which is where we can write what is on the image. You might have heard of this if you've ever done any kind of SEO for your site to be found in Google. Alt tags are quite important for that because they describe what is on the image. And so obviously only an image can have a source attribute and an alt attribute, and only a link can have a href attribute, right? Different attributes for different kind of elements, but they always go in the opening tag. Now, another thing you'll notice for images is that there is no close image tag. Why is there no close image tag? Well, because there's like no text to put here. It's just an image, so it doesn't need a closing tag. Image is one of the only elements that you'll see that don't have closing tags. Some other elements that don't have closing tags are the horizontal rule, which usually puts like a line on the page like this, and maybe also the breaker element. So let me put a big paragraph on the page, and let's say that I want this to go to the next line. Well, simply putting enter here in the HTML is not going to do anything. So what we do is we put a breaker element like this, BR, and that will put it onto the next line. We can put that anywhere we want to create new lines. And now getting back to the image element, I just realized I should demonstrate how it actually works to add an image in HTML. You need to have the image hosted somewhere first. So in Shopify, you could do this using the content files area. So you could upload an image here using upload files, and then you can grab the link to that image, and we put the link into the source, right? So as soon as we do that, we should see our image showing up. It's going to be too big, and generally we would make that smaller with CSS, but we would also fill out the alt text by saying Joby GorillaPod, right? Or whatever is in the image. And part of the reason for the alt text is that if the source is broken for some reason, if the image isn't loading, it'll show this icon and the text of what was supposed to be there. Alright, now I think you're starting to understand HTML quite well. These are obviously not all the elements in HTML, there are many more, but these are probably the most common ones, right? And once you know these, you'll understand the rest. You can just Google what other elements are for if you see an element that you don't really recognize, but you'll learn this very quickly. HTML is not difficult. It's not a real programming language, it's just markup. So the last thing I want to show you is the concept of classes. Class is just an attribute, just like href or source, right? But you can put class on absolutely any element. And it's just kind of a way to give an element a name, like, you know, what purpose it's for, right? If a paragraph doesn't have a class, like let's say this is just an empty paragraph in the code, and I'm like, what the hell is this for, right? If I'm like a developer and I see that another developer has worked on it, right? Whereas if it had a class, and I see something like product description, and I'm like, oh, right, okay, the product description goes in here. Whereas if I just saw a random empty paragraph, I'd probably delete it. I'd be like, what's the purpose of that? Anyway, so the product description goes here. IDs are very similar, except I think that you'll see this less commonly. They're written the same way. ID equals, you know, features, safety. These are product features. But you'll see this less commonly because if I had a second one of these on the page, this would already be incorrect HTML. There should only be one of a particular ID on the page. ID must be unique, whereas with classes, you'll often see something like this. I haven't taught you about divs yet, but I will soon. But you'll see a grid with like 3 columns, and they all have the class of column. So you can use these as many times as you want, and they will all get the same CSS applied to them. So yes, that is the second and most important usage of classes, I think. Well, the first is obviously to describe the element, and I think that's quite important, but mainly it's also to target the element with CSS, which I'll go into in the next chapter. But to show you quickly, this is how I target a class with CSS, and I would make that blue. So we're making the product title blue. We're targeting product title, and we use the dot for that, but I'll show you that later. And the last, most important thing there is to HTML is the div element, which you'll see everywhere. I think this is the most common element that you will see all the time. And unlike all these other elements, it doesn't actually mean anything. So all these elements, that's a heading, you know, that's a paragraph. They all have their specific purpose. But div doesn't have any specific purpose. It stands for division, but it's basically just a box to contain something and to group your HTML. So for example, let's say that this paragraph and this features list, I want to contain this all in a div with the class of product information, right? I'm just going to grab all this and indent and paste it in here. Okay. And so now this is my product information div, right? I can minimize it if that makes it more readable for me, but you get what I mean. It contains everything in this little box, and it makes your HTML much better structured and much easier to style with CSS. So now if I wanted to move both of these things to the right, to the left, you know, position them somewhere or put them inside like a card, let's say, then I would simply target the product information div, and, you know, everything else is inside of that box. And this is how I would do that, right? Obviously that's ugly as hell, but you get the idea. Because I've put them inside of this div, I don't have to target each one of these anymore. That's enough for HTML, I think. Let's move on to CSS. I hope CSS will go a little bit faster, because with HTML there was just a lot of basics to cover. So CSS, how does it work? First of all, as you saw in the HTML section, we target HTML with this part of the CSS, which is called the selector. Okay, so it works like this. You have a selector, which is a HTML element, and then you open up these curly braces and you can write your rules inside here. Okay, and your rule is split up into a property and a value. But let's talk about these selectors first. How do you target a HTML element? Well, you can just use the name of the element. So we can just target H2, and this will target the H2, but it will target all H2s like everywhere across our website. What if we only want to target one of them, like a special one? Or, you know, H2 is a bad example, but what if we had paragraphs? We're not just going to target paragraph, because we would target like every paragraph on the entire website. We don't want everything to be blue or whatever. So usually we target classes, right? As I showed you here, we do dot, that means a class, product title, right? And that would target this title here. And now it's not important. We don't have to write h1.productTitle or h2.productTitle. It's just whatever the class is. So now if I do want to change this to a h2, as long as I don't change the class, it doesn't matter. I'm targeting the class itself, and I can put this class on any element as well. Okay, ID is very similar, except we use this, you know, we use hash for the ID, but you won't often see this. Nobody uses IDs to style something. You can, but nobody actually does that. One very important thing you have to understand about CSS is that it works in order of what came last. Whatever instruction came last, that's what's going to take priority. So let's say that I have this rule that's turning the title blue, and then below that I write another rule that turns the title red. Well, now the title is going to be red. This is going to be overwritten by the last instruction that was given. And this is very important for you, because I think that if you're working on a Shopify theme, it's important that you put your CSS towards the bottom of a file. That is, if you're editing a CSS file in Shopify, if you put your CSS at the bottom, it's going to take priority. If you put your CSS at the top, you're going to wonder why it's not working, right? Because it's above all the other theme CSS. Yeah, so generally, whenever you're writing CSS in Shopify, if you're like customizing your theme, you're making your own modifications, then what you're really doing is you're overriding your theme's styles, right? That's what you want to do. You see that your your title is at a certain font size or whatever, and you're like, I don't like that, I want to change that, what you're doing is you're overriding that, right? So it's important that you understand priority in CSS. So the next thing that affects this, like which rule takes control, is that you can write your CSS in different places. Let's imagine that this is a different CSS file. This is a separate CSS file. So you can write your CSS in a separate file. You can also write your CSS in HTML files by using the HTML style tag, right? And in between these HTML style tags, I can also write CSS. And this is very useful because this is exactly what I do when I want to build a little feature like this. So this pulsing green in stock icon, we see that here, and I put my HTML here and my CSS is in here inside style tags, you see? So it means that I don't need to put this CSS in like a separate file somewhere else in my theme where I then have to find it, and like that would be really annoying, wouldn't it? I can put it all together here in HTML using these style tags, and I think that's what you're going to be doing a lot as well. And luckily, this is called embedded CSS, and this is called external CSS when it's in a separate file. Embedded CSS takes priority. So if I want to make the background of this to be pink, if I write that here, it's going to become pink, because this embedded CSS, the way I think about it is that it's closer to the actual HTML, right? This is in a separate file, whereas this is in the same file. It's kind of like closer, and so it takes priority. And then the third level is inline CSS. This is generally not recommended because it can get pretty messy, but what you do is write the style attribute, right, which you can also apply to any HTML element. And here you don't need a selector because, well, you're already in the element, so you just write your CSS rule. So let's choose a different color, and this will take priority over the embedded style, which takes priority over the external style. See what I mean? Because it's closer to the element, this is directly on the element, this is always going to override any other styling information. And yeah, I mentioned that it's messy, and the reason is that because imagine I wanted to put like lots of styles here. If I had like 4 styles in here, this would become a very long line. It's not very readable. So generally you don't want to do this unless you just got one small tweak, right? Then it's clean enough and it's very quick and easy. The last thing I wanted to show you is how you can target the children of specific elements in CSS. So here we have a paragraph that is outside of the product information container, and we have a paragraph inside of it. And let's say that I wanted to make this white, but I want to leave this alone. And the way to do that is to target the parent container and then space, and then we can target the child like that, and we'll make that color white. Okay, and that's going to make this white, but it's not making this white. Whereas obviously if I just did this, then it would make both paragraphs white, and we don't want that. We don't want to affect elements other than the elements we're trying to style. So I think by now you understand CSS pretty well, at least at a basic level. CSS, to be honest, is a huge topic. Like compared to HTML, like HTML, there's almost not that much to learn, you know, but CSS, there is a lot to learn. And with JavaScript, there's also a lot to learn. So like even in my book, right, the CSS section is like, there's like 12 sub chapters. HTML is much shorter. I pretty much explained all of HTML here. CSS, I'm probably gonna extend this even more. As you can see, Liquid is pretty short because Liquid is kind of easy, but there's a whole lot more to CSS. Now, as for JavaScript, there's a whole lot to learn there as well, but you first need to be pretty good at HTML and CSS. That's why I'm not teaching you, and I didn't include a lot of JavaScript stuff in this book, besides just explaining how it works. So now let's move on to JavaScript. I'm just gonna explain how it works. We're not gonna go too much into the details. All right, let's talk about JavaScript. So as I've mentioned, JavaScript handles any kind of interactions on your store, such as when you switch the variant and you see the image changes. It also handles any sliders and carousels, basically, whenever you're interacting with something on the page. JavaScript is a more advanced skill than HTML or CSS. Although arguable with CSS, but it's definitely like the next level. So you have to be at least intermediate in HTML and CSS before starting to learn JavaScript, I think. And if your goal is just to do minor tweaks to your store, just to make things look slightly different, then CSS is going to be your main skill and you don't really need JavaScript. I would definitely say JavaScript is more of a skill where you're looking to do some kind of development professionally. But anyway, let's walk through this little script here that basically just is a counter, so it adds to this number every time I click add to cart. In this script we can see some of the main concepts that you need to know in JavaScript. The first is variables, then we have an event listener which waits for a click to happen, and then we have a function that runs when that click happens. Right, so this is a very simple script. The first thing we're doing is creating a variable which saves a certain value under a name, right? So let cart count equals 0. This is just like storing our current number, like the current amount of items in the cart. Next, we're setting a variable of button, and that's just because I don't want to repeat myself here with targeting the actual add to cart button. What I'm doing here is basically targeting the button by its ID. See here in HTML, I've given an ID to the button, and as I mentioned, I mostly use classes for CSS and I use IDs for JavaScript. So we're targeting this ID to get the button and to save it under the word button. So now I don't have to type this again. I can just write button later in the code, right? Now what I'm doing on this line is I'm adding an event listener to listen for the click event, and then it's going to run something. And what it's going to run is add to cart, which I define here, function add to cart. This is where we create this function, and inside of these curly braces is where the actual instructions go. So a function is like a little recipe. It's like a little program inside of your main program, right? You can have as many functions as you want that do little things and use them like this. So what I'm doing inside of this function is I'm setting this cart count, which was 0 at first. I'm resetting it to be what it was plus 1, right? So when it was 0, it'd be 0 plus 1, so it's 1. If it was 1, it'd be 1 plus 1, which is 2. And then the final part of this function is, again, document.querySelector, the same that we used here to get the button, except now we're using document.querySelector to get an ID of cart items. And that's what I got here. I have my number, 0, inside of a span, which is like a div. It has no specific purpose, but inside of a span with an ID of cart items. So what I'm doing is I'm getting this HTML here, and I'm setting the inner HTML to be the number saved in cart count. So as you can see, this is a very simple script, but it can become kind of convoluted. There's a lot more syntax to know, and there's also like you have to think logically. This is actually real programming, unlike HTML and CSS, which are not really programming languages. JavaScript is a programming language, and you're giving instructions to the computer to do something, and so there's a lot more skill involved. Luckily in Shopify, you don't actually need JavaScript that much. Even as a freelance developer, I probably only used it on 20, maybe 30% of projects that I did. Really, the majority of things can be achieved using HTML, CSS, and Liquid. Liquid is going to be much more useful to you than JavaScript, especially as a beginner. So let's get on to the fun stuff, Shopify Liquid. Alright, now we need to leave CodePen, unfortunately, because Shopify Liquid only works inside of Shopify. So I've added this custom Liquid block here, and that's what I'm going to use to demonstrate. Let me zoom in a little bit. There is some confusion about this custom Liquid block. People have asked me, can they write HTML in here? And yes, the answer is that yes, Liquid is mixed in with your HTML. So you can write any HTML here, and that includes, you can write CSS as well, as long as that CSS is inside of style tags. And you can also write JavaScript in here if it's inside of script tags. So Basically, this is not just for liquid, it's, you can write a lot of things in here. So as I was saying, liquid is mixed in with your HTML. The best way to demonstrate this is a little example from the book here. Let's just take a look at this code. And what I have is a paragraph, and it says get it now for just, and then we have this double curly braces and product.price. And I think you can guess what this is doing. It's obviously outputting the price of the product. And that's just a good example of how liquid is mixed with HTML completely freely, right? Let me just separate this out a bit. But as you can see, it's outputting get it now for just 7,700. No, it's $77. It just hasn't been formatted yet as money, right? But I'll get to that a little bit later. But the important thing to remember now is that liquid is used to output data from the Shopify admin and put it into your HTML, right? So it makes your pages dynamic. We don't have Allen Gravel woven pants in our code. We just have product.title, right? Product.title will output the product title. Likewise, we could output, for example, inside of a div, the product description. Okay, and that's just product.description. That will output the entire description here. Not that I want it here, but you can see that it's very, very simple. And I don't remember all of these. You don't need to remember all of these. There's something called the Shopify Liquid cheat sheet that will let you know all of the different properties of every object. So here on the right, for example, we see the product object, and we have the different properties of that object. So we have the product.description, the product.id, the images, the price, which you saw me output, right? And these are all the things that we can use on the product. Something you have to understand is that you can only use the product object on the product page, right? If you're on another type of page, for example, on the home page, then you can't use the product object, right? If I added a custom liquid section here, we wouldn't be able to access the product object because it's like, which product? There is no product here. There are many products in your store, but there isn't like one product for which we can output the title. It doesn't make sense what you're asking Shopify to do here. And for example, let's go to a collection page. On the collection page, we have something called collection, the collection object. And a collection has products, and we can get the first product in that, and then we can get the title of that. So as you can see, these properties can be chained on with dots. And so we're going into we're looking at the collection, we're going into the products on that collection, we're going into the first product, and then we're getting the title of that first product. So that's an example of, again, we're accessing products on a collection page, but indirectly. First, we need to go inside of the collection object. I hope that makes sense. So while we're on this page, I'll demonstrate the second main use of liquid. I've shown you the double curly braces, which are used to output something, to output some data from the Shopify admin. There's another type, which is the curly brace and percentage sign, okay? And these allow you to do logic in liquid. It's not as complicated as JavaScript, not as powerful as JavaScript, but you can do some basic things like a for loop, okay? How a for loop works is we say for, something. This is a name that we give. I can say prod in collection.products, okay? So I know that collection.products is a list, and I want to basically output that list, okay? I'll put an end for here, and that code will now be correct. And here inside of this loop now, it's saying for every product, I'll just rename this product, okay? It's saying that for every product, do something. And I'm gonna say output the product.title. And here we have a list of all our product titles in this collection, okay? In this test products collection that I have. You know what, let's put a comma after this, and you'll see that each one of them gets a comma, okay? If I put a breaker, then we'll put them all on separate lines. So these are all my products. And that's how a for loop works. And this is basically what's happening on any collection page. What your theme is doing is it's just got a simple for loop like this, and then it's outputting, you know, the product title, the price, the image, you know, and styling them with CSS, obviously, and just outputting a certain number of products on each collection page. Another thing that we can do using the Liquid logic tags is an if statement. I think you will probably find this more useful than a for loop. You'll use this a lot more. An if statement is basically a condition. So if the product title is awesome shoes, output this, right? So if the product title is not awesome shoes, like basically on any products that are not titled awesome shoes, you won't see this, okay? And that's very useful. So for example, let me go into here. I got this flashing in stock icon, and this is the HTML for it. Here's some HTML, and then here's the CSS. But this is going to show up on every single product. But what if the product's not in stock? If the product's not in stock, then maybe I don't want to output this, right? So I'm going to wrap this inside Liquid logic tags. I'm going to say if product, and then I'll consult the cheat sheet to see how do I check if a product is in stock, right? And I see product.available. Does that mean in stock? Returns true if a product is available for purchase. Returns false if the quantity is 0 and if the inventory policy is not set to allow users to purchase this item, even if it is no longer in stock, right? So basically it's out of stock and you're not letting people buy items that are out of stock, then product.available will be false. And so that's the one that I would use. I'm going to wrap the entire thing. So I'll put my end diff at the very end because I don't even want to output the styles either. Why would I output the styles if I'm not outputting the HTML, you know? So if the product is not available, this isn't going to show up anymore. Now I'll quickly show you one last thing, and we're going to go back to outputting data with these double curly braces. And the thing I want to show you is filters. So on these double curly braces, you can use a filter, which is using the pipe symbol. This is where your backslash is on your keyboard. And I want to fix up this 7700, right? I want it to be, you know, formatted as money. And so I'm just going to use the money filter. And this is automatically going to apply our currency, which is dollars, and it'll put the dot point in the correct place. So that's looking a lot better. Here we have AUD as well, and you can use money with currency for that. And that would also output the AUD. And of course, there are lots of different filters. So here I'm outputting the product title. You can see it here. And let's say that for some reason, I want to make it lowercase. I can write downcase, and it's going to become lowercase. And I can chain these on, so I can go after that. I can, you know, if for some reason I want to make it uppercase, I can uppercase it, and I can keep doing stuff to it, you know, from left to right. It's kind of like a pipeline, right? Imagine it just flows like from left to right. It keeps getting modified by every filter that it encounters. Okay, and you can use the cheat sheet as well to see all the different types of filters there are. So, you know, capitalize, downcase. You can prepend and append things. This is very useful sometimes. You can remove something from the text. You can split it into two different parts. Lots of little useful things that you will use when you become more experienced with Liquid. And filters are particularly useful for images. Whenever you work with images in Shopify and you output them at a certain size, or you want to get them from a certain place, you have to use filters. So here, you know, we have the name of an image, and then we have the filter file image URL. So this is for images that are inside content files in your admin, whereas you can use asset image URL if they're in the assets folder, or if they're like a product image, then you would use image URL like this. So just a little preview. But obviously I can't cover all of this in this one video. But that's all for Liquid. I think you have a pretty good understanding of it now. There are only really two types of tags in Liquid. And these are these double curly braces for objects and for outputting data. And we have these %sign brackets for logic, like if statements and for loops. And that's almost all there is to Shopify. There's one last thing, which is JSON. It's not really a programming language. It's quite simple, and it's used to set up the settings in Shopify. So everything that you see inside the sidebar here, this is all set up with JSON, and it's quite easy to modify. So let's move on to JSON. JSON is pretty easy. It stands for JavaScript Object Notation, but it's not really JavaScript. It just looks like JavaScript. And it's just used to store data, right? So it's not like programming language. It doesn't really do anything. It's kind of like a table or like an Excel spreadsheet or something. Just it stores data. So as you can see, we've got name, John Doe, age, 30, right? This is called the key, and then this is the value, okay? And the key is usually in quotation marks like this, and then we have a colon, and then we write, you know, the actual value. You'll see that 30, because it's a number, it's not in quotation marks, but text needs to be in quotation marks. And then at the end of every line, we have a comma. And JSON is really useful because it allows us to store an unlimited amount of data about something, about an object, right? So for example, we got this person, name, John Doe, age, and stuff like that, and we got his address, yeah? And because his address isn't easy to write in like one thing, like here, in one piece of text, we just have yet another object, right? We've got this outer object, and we've got yet another object inside here. And we can keep nesting them to an unlimited, well, maybe there is some sort of limit, but we can keep nesting them, right? We got another object here, and inside of the address object, we got street, city, zip code. And the other thing that we have is we can have a list. So we got hobbies here, and then you'll notice that instead of curly braces, as with an object, we have square braces here, and the square braces is just because we have a list of strings. We just have a list of text items, reading, traveling, photography, right? Nothing complicated, but yeah, these square brackets, they hold a list, and these curly braces, they hold another object. That might have been a bit too much detail, but I wanted to make sure that you understand how to read JSON objects. It's really not that difficult. And in Shopify, you will mainly see it in two places. The first place is the section schema, okay? The section schema is what sets up the settings in the sidebar here. It's mostly used by developers. I don't know if you will be using the section schema that much, unless you want to make new settings for yourself so that it's easier in future to like change something. I don't know. But the section schema is at the bottom of each section file. This is Liquid, it says schema, and at the bottom there's an end schema, but inside of it, basically there's this JSON object. And this JSON is simply the name of the section, and don't worry about this stuff, but inside of the section we have blocks, and we also have settings. And as you can see, this is an array, a list, those square brackets that I showed you. So we got hobbies, and we got his hobbies, and we got here blocks, and we have a list of blocks that are available inside of this section. Makes sense, right? I'm looking at the main product, the main product section here, which is product information. And inside of this section, we have these types of blocks available. We have the app block, we have the text block, and then the text block has its own settings, and it has an array, and so it goes on to another level. And we have the rich text block, the title block, the price block, the SKU, right? And it matches all of these blocks that we have available. We have the price block, right? We have the rich text block, the SKU. This is how all these blocks are created. They're created here. And finally, the second place where JSON is used on your Shopify store is to save any settings that you make inside the theme customizer. So whenever you drag these around, that's recorded in JSON. Whenever you change your settings, that's recorded in JSON. And it's recorded in your template files, right? We're looking at the collection template right now, and these are the sections that we have. So let's pay attention to this. Product grid, then collection banner, then custom liquid. And I'm on the collection page. This is what's in the template. So let's go into the templates folder in our theme and find collection.json. That's the template for the collection page. And inside that we will see sections, right? And it's an object. And we see that the sections that I have on the page are main collection product grid, main collection banner, and custom liquid, right? Product grid, collection banner, and custom liquid. This is all recorded. This isn't setting up the section. No. These sections already exist in a separate file. So main collection product grid, that's right here. Main collection product grid.liquid, and this contains the HTML and the liquid to actually output that product grid. So this isn't like setting up the HTML or anything. This is simply recording your settings. Look at this. If I drag this to the top and I hit save, we can go back here and refresh, and you'll notice that the custom liquid will be the first section here, followed by the product grid and so on. And inside of this product grid, you know, products per page, columns on desktop, look at this. Products per page, 16. Number of columns on desktop, 4. If I change this to 2 and I refresh, this would change to 2, okay? Usually we don't touch this. This is all just like recorded by the changes that you make here. So there's not much reason for you to touch this, but sometimes when you are migrating to maybe a newer copy of your theme, you would copy this all if you want to copy your settings to your to the newer version of your theme. You would also do that for settings data.json. So this is the data recorded for your global theme settings, which is here. Logo, colors, typography, you know, if you don't want to reset up like all these colors and stuff in another theme, you can try, it doesn't always work, but you can try to copy settings data.json and copy that into the settings data.json on another theme. And that's all there is to JSON. So guys, I think that now you have a pretty good understanding of the 5 languages or the 5 technologies that are used in Shopify, and you can maybe start going through your theme and actually be able to read them and understand what's going on. Now, as I mentioned, this entire video was just chapter 1 of my book. Don't worry, my book isn't that long. It's written in a much more concise form, and you can use it to reference. So if you're interested in further learning, then you should definitely check out my ebook. You'll find the link in the description. Chapter 2 goes into the Shopify theme architecture. We go into each folder in your theme and talk about what it's used for, what those files are and how they work, right? Chapter 3 is about where you can start coding while also keeping your theme updatable and maintainable, right? And not breaking anything. So there's very practical recommendations here about where you can actually write code and how to do that while keeping everything clean. Chapter 4, 5, and 6 go into a deeper dive into HTML, CSS, and Liquid, and I'll actually be teaching you how to use those things, right? If you don't like reading, that's okay. There is a course coming soon. It's going to be roughly based on this book. However, I still recommend getting this book because it can be used as a reference, right? Whenever you're actually doing something on your store, you can go back and refer to the book and have a look at the examples and how you should do things, right? Whereas with a video course, it's not so easy and quick to look back on it and check something. Lastly, I just want to say that I'm literally not earning anything from YouTube right now. YouTube has decided to demonetize my channel for something that I didn't do. So I'm not earning anything for the time that I spend making these videos. So if you buy my ebook, you'll also be supporting my channel, which I appreciate greatly. If you have any questions or any suggestions for further videos, please leave a comment below. Good luck and see you in the next video.